Good evening, everyone. We're just going to let the guests come into the room. Thank you for joining us. We've got quite a few guests joining us this evening. So glad you're with us. This is an important discussion we're going to have this evening, and we're very excited you're all coming into the webinar. Make yourself comfortable. Get your cup of coffee ready. You're in for a wonderful evening this evening, and we're just excited you're joining us. We're going to let more guests come into the room. And our speakers are excited to meet you. The chat has been disabled, but we will be taking some questions. So we will just allow another minute or so to pass to let all of the guests come into the webinar. Again, my name is Miley Martin. Thank you for joining us. This event is put together by the Asian American Faculty Staff Association. We're glad you're joining us this evening for a table talk, Stand with Asians. We're just going to give it a couple more moments before we get started. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Stand with Asians table talk about targeted hate crimes and incidents against Asians. My name is Miley Martin, and I will be the facilitator. Stand with Asians was put together by the Asian American Faculty and Staff Association, and joining us now is the association president, Dr. Chai He.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us today on a very important topic. There has been a rise of attacks in the Asian community since the pandemic, and the recent Atlanta incident has greatly affected our community. Our community is hurting, fearful, and our elders are vulnerable and helpless. It is a critical time for activism, for us to support each other, to come together, and I'm happy to be here today with my colleagues. I hope this brings awareness to everyone and we can stand together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chai. And now I'm honored to welcome the president of Fresno City College, Dr. Carol Goldsmith, to say a few words.
Thank you, Miley, and thank you, Chai, for having me here tonight. I want to put a little context in tonight. At some places across our nation, Asian Americans are put aside in the discussion and in the narrative of diversity and inclusion, but not here at Fresno City College, and especially not here at State Center. And I want to remind people that with the help of then President Deborah Akeda, who is now our trustee, Deborah Akeda, she worked tirelessly to get the state to allow our institutional researchers to disaggregate the data. So now when we look at our measurements, we now can look at our Southeast Asian populations, Hmong, Vietnamese, Laotian, Lao, Cambodian, and we look at other Asian groups in terms of Chinese, Korean, Indian subcontinent, Japanese, as well as Filipino. And if it wasn't for her tireless commitment to get this worked and also to work with the state chancellor's office, we wouldn't be able to look at our data accurately. And I have to say, I'm proud of that because it allows for us to have a foundation for us today to come and start having these important, although sad, discussions. In January, our State Center Community College Board of Trustees passed an anti-racist resolution, which they voted on unanimously. And in that, it acknowledged that we are a system of colleges and we are here to serve as the primary gateway to higher education for all communities of color. And the anti-racist resolution confirmed our commitment to anti-racism and to foster a culture in which all members of our community feel safe and respected and valued and like they belong. And it continues to go on, but I want to really talk about today, feeling safe. Unfortunately, in our country right now, we are seeing an incredible, disturbing rise in hate crimes against our Asian Americans. Tonight, we're going to talk about that. And before the Atlanta murders, I was asked to come to be part of this, and I was working on a statement, a letter of support of this event. And then after the murders happened, I couldn't have it just be a letter or a statement. So earlier this month, we took a resolution to our own college council, and I'm happy to say that our academic senate and our classified state senate has also passed a resolution condemning the recent surge in hate crimes targeting Asian Americans. And today, I was very pleased to read that the acting U.S. attorney, along with the FBI special agent, spoke out about the hate crimes and that they are intending to fully prosecute these acts of violence. So we come today together to talk about what is going on in our society and make sure that everybody on our campus and our community understands and knows that we speak out against this, that we are against this, and that we will not stand for this. We stand united and in solidarity. And we will continue to stand with the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. And we call on all citizens and all leaders to join us on condemning these outrageous acts against Asian Americans in all its forms. And we renew our commitment to speak out against such attacks and defend and protect those who are targeted. And we seek out punishment and call for punishment on those who commit these hateful crimes against members of the AAPI community. I just want you to know, as your president, that the college will continue to support and offer services to our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities to combat the recent rise and surge against this community. And as part of a larger, unfortunate, and terrible history that we have. We must continue to work together to create a community that is centered on solutions that stop violence. So we will continue to offer psych services to anyone who's feeling impacted by these. We're going to continue to bring in law enforcement when any of our members of our staff or students are possible victim of these. And I just want to tell you, as your president, I'm honored to stand with you today in this very important event. I want to thank Miley and Shay and everybody on the committee that's put this together. I also want to thank Susie Nitzel, who's behind the screen making all of this worthwhile. I also want to thank our interpreter, Chelsea, to make sure our voice is heard for those who are hearing impaired. So thank you again, and I look forward to tonight's dialogue.
Dr. Goldsmith, thank you very much for your words. Mean a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, this evening, you will hear incredible personal stories that are both passionate and vulnerable. But before I introduce our speakers, I want you to know that the chat has been disabled and the Q&A is open for comments and questions that will be answered as we go along. If you prefer a live response, you can add that in the Q&A, and time permitting, we will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So with that said, let's meet our panel of presenters in the order they will be speaking this evening, beginning with Cami Tepavong, who is the program coordinator for the United Southeast Asian American Academic Program and a general counselor at Fresno City College. Jack Yang is a transfer counselor at Fresno City College. John Cho teaches Asian American Studies at Fresno City College. Juliana Pukau is a visual designer for a local company called Project 15, a community advocate, and an ambassador for the Laotian American community of Fresno. Mai Yang is a system librarian and the liaison librarian for the health sciences at Fresno City College. Now, Cami and Jack will present some key facts and data on anti-Asian hate incidents, as well as the history of anti-Asian racism and hate incidents in our state and nation.
Thank you, Miley. And thank you so much, Dr. Goldsmith, for being here with us and really, using your platform to show your support and solidarity, not only with your Asian American faculty and staff and students here at Fresno City, but also to our larger Asian American community here in Fresno. Thank you to our audience. I see that we have about 106. I mean, that's amazing. Thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. Your presence really gives us strength and a reminder that we're not alone. Even though at times it may feel like it, especially in our current situation, that we're not able to convene, not able to interact in person. So it really means a lot that you are all here. And specifically to my Asian American community members, students and families are tuning in. You all have been in our thoughts and in our hearts. It has no doubt been a very extremely challenging and difficult year for so many of us, right? All Americans, all communities, as the coronavirus does not discriminate. So many of us have been impacted or know a loved one that has been impacted by the pandemic with job loss, food insecurities, as well as housing instability, mental health issues, loss of loved ones, and so much more. That itself has been so hard for many of us. And my heart is especially, heavy. And I'll be honest, I haven't been getting much sleep. Because on top of all that I just discussed, us Asian Americans are also facing additional physical and mental health harm. So many of us have become victims and are fearful of being a victim of anti-Asian hate, discrimination, harassment, and unprovoked violent attacks. This dramatic increase of the incidents has been happening for over a year now. So that's why my colleagues, and I, when we met about the end of February, really wanted to plan this event to bring awareness, have a safe space to share our experiences and to connect with one another. Because prior to the Atlanta shooting, there was not been much news in our local news or social or the main media, right? But we know because we're in the community. We follow a lot of social media groups. We know this has been happening. So we felt that as a community member in Asian American here at Fresno City, that we had to do something. We had to bring this awareness to everyone. So we hope that through this continued discussions and engagement, that we find the courage to find our voices and really take action, no matter how small, to really stand up for one another and to show up to fight racism and injustices that we face here in our community. And now, before I cover the data points, I really want to share this really short video clip with everyone. So Susie, you could please help us with that.
Asians are often seen as an afterthought, the feeling that you don't belong, the feeling that you have to prove yourself consistently, and we shouldn't be.
Our people are getting attacked, our people are getting harassed, spat on, beat up, slashed. Please somebody pay attention. Please, notice us. Give me confirmation that, I am American too. And I just haven't been able to feel that in a long time.
Happy birthday to you. My father, he's a family man. He worked for over 35 years at the bank. He been here since 1999 in America. He's a good senior citizen.
He ran from all the way across the street downhill and slammed him into the garage into the floor and broke his head open.
I want him to stay alive and wake up and come and see me again. But he never wake up again, and I pray for him.
We know that we got to speak up and we can't be quiet about this because that's why this keeps happening.
He just assaulted me. This man had just assaulted me. No, you pushed me, bro. We got evidence.
There are reports of dozens of incidents of bias against Chinese Americans in this country. Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China.
That is just a quick clip of the many incidents that's been happening across our nation. And I wanted to highlight a few other incidents as well. So if you could please get our PowerPoint up here. So, these are the ones we wanted to highlight, but like I mentioned, there's so many that had happened and they're all horrific. The bottom one here, this really, as being a mother of two young girls, I'm sorry. His father and his two young sons just went to Sam's Club, just to go shopping. A member or a shopper was there as well. Had a knife, start yelling out that it was their fault of the coronavirus and the pandemic. Start slashing and stabbing the father and the two kids. They were only 2 and 6 years old. Thank goodness an employee there stepped in. He also got hurt, but he was able to hold down the perpetrator. And that was how it ended. But they survived, but could you imagine a traumatic type of, the traumatic experience that these two young boys and their father had to go through? It's gonna take years to get over something like this. And then we have Lee, 36-year-old Hmong woman, was assaulted and then murdered in Wisconsin. She was at the park just relaxing on her own, and five groups of very young men, harassed her and then assaulted and murdered her. And of course, the Atlanta shooting that just recently happened about a week ago, 8 people got killed, 6 of them were Asian women. It's still under investigation as far as if it's going to be tried as a hate crime, because it's very difficult, unfortunately, to prove things like that. And down here, the Hmong family here in Fresno. So incidents are happening locally. It's just not reported. But someone vandalized their car, put some racist remarks on there, and and this was in Fresno. Again, this is just very few of just examples of what's going on. Could we go to our next slide, please? And I wanted to show here that the incidents and crimes, it's been happening for over a year. I mean, we've been, there's been anti-Asian hate for as long as our history that we've been in this country. But in 2020 alone, it increased 1,900%. And from last year to the end of February of this year, 3,800 incidents have been reported. And we know that's quite low. I mean, it's high, but I know it could be higher. And I know it is because so many do not report it. And there's a lot of factors why people don't report, right? It could be one, fear of retaliation. 2, they feel that, hey, if I report this, nothing's going to happen. I'm just wasting my time. The person's going to get away. Nothing's going to happen. And 3rd, a lot of the incidents are elderly. Many do not speak the language, so they do not know how to report. Next slide, please. So the next two slides is just some definitions I feel is important, for the audience, especially our young students who's out there, because you've probably seen these terms all over, the news. So what is xenophobia, right? It's dislike of or prejudice against people from other countries. And then we have hate incidents versus hate crime. Hate incidents are, acts of racial prejudice. It could be harassment, racial slurs, spitting, denying service by businesses, vandalism, and property damage. Hate crime is causing or attempting to actually cause bodily injury due to someone's race, color, or national origin. Hate crime is really hard, like I mentioned a little bit before, to to be able to prove in court, right? Because the definition or the law is very narrow. So I know that's something that with the Atlanta shooting that they see that the majority of the victims are Asian, but to actually prove it, it's something it's not going to be easy. And I know folks are on different sides, so that I won't get into details. But these are just some important definitions that we should be aware of and know what they mean. Next, I'm going to transition to my colleague Jack to kind of go over the history of anti-Asian racism in our country.
Thank you, Cami. First of all, let's just really say like it really is, which is Asian hate crimes is nothing new in our country. People simply don't know or forget that there has been a history of discrimination against Asians in this country. Unfortunately, our history is not widely covered in K through 12, which means that our history, the pain and the suffering of our ancestors is just simply minimized and forgotten. Honestly, while I've been preparing for this event this evening, I actually had to go back and relearn a lot of the history that I should have learned in K through 12 in high school while taking US history. I actually learned a lot, and unfortunately, this is not covered in the curriculum. And Asians have been subjected to racism and hate as early as the late 19th century, with anti-Chinese sentiments that stem from fears attributed to declining wages and unemployment. Furthermore, we saw that Asians were again targeted during World War II, where over 120,000 Japanese Americans were incarcerated in internment camps. I remember like growing up, having peers and friends who were Japanese, and I used to always wonder like, why don't they know how to speak Japanese? I never knew as a child, but as an adult, now that I can kind of look back and reflect, I realize now that because of situations like the Japanese internment camps, Japanese people were disempowered and they had to hide their native tongue because of fear of association. And so it's such a shame that they have to like pretty much erase their language, a whole generation not speaking Japanese. And then not too long ago, South Asians, Muslims, and Middle Easterners were targeted during the aftermath of 9/11. And so today we see Asians being scapegoated once again during the pandemic. And in fact, this rise of hate crimes and incidents is directly connected to the rhetoric promoted by the Trump administration. Referring to COVID-19 as Kung Flu and China virus is just simply dangerous and irresponsible for anyone with a public platform. And because of this ignorant narrative, people have felt emboldened and a sense of entitlement to commit acts of violence and hate toward Asians because our race has been scapegoated and blamed for the pandemic. To equate a virus or disease to a particular group or a country is not without consequence. What history has shown us is that naming diseases after countries and groups leads to scapegoating, discrimination, and stigmatizing these particular groups of individuals. And so today, here we are talking about these horrific crimes. Next slide, please. Coined in the 1960s, Asians are referred to as the model minority despite the historic bigotry they've experienced. The model minority myth is just simply problematic and has negative repercussions on the Asian community. Next slide, please. You know, as a child among refugees, I never personally connected to the model minority myth. I, like many Southeast Asians, grew up in low-income household. And did you know that statistically, the more times you take the SATs, the higher your score should be? Well, I'm almost embarrassed to say that in high school, I took the SATs multiple times. And you know what? I scored lower and lower with each attempt. I think at a point where I was told to stop taking the SATs. You know, so I single-handedly debunked the model minority myth because I didn't have the resources that Asians were assumed to have, such as tutoring, college preparatory courses, and a set of tiger parents. My parents were too busy out in the field as farmers to be checking up on me to see if I was doing my homework. And the reality is that the model minority myth is just simply untrue and has perpetuated this falsehood that Asians are docile, that we're subservient, and we're submissive, because we're not. This myth assumes that Asians are successful and high achieving as a whole despite their race. The model minority myth just simply does not account for the fact that you have Asians who have immigrated here in the United States for better economic opportunities. And then you have those who have come to the United States who have fled some of the most bombed countries as refugees. Asians in general, just a very diverse group. So Asians in general have one of the largest income gaps of any racial group. Furthermore, 30% of Southeast Asians have not completed a high school diploma, which is actually double the national average, which is 13%, with Cambodians being the lowest. Furthermore, 14% of Laotian only have a bachelor's degree, which is also the lowest of all demographic, racial, ethnic groups. And then lastly, 60% of Hmong Americans are living in poverty at low income levels. And this totally debunks the model minority myth that we are all successful. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering, why is it problematic to be typecasted as being successful, right? Doesn't sound that bad, but really when you think about it, the model minority myth is problematic because Asians simply become invisible in the discussion of race because we are seen as being white adjacent. And this notion has been perpetuated in Washington, where a school district clumped Asians and whites into the same category, the same racial category, which further makes Asians invisible. Furthermore, during the election, I don't know if you all were paying attention, but I was hooked on my TV. And when CNN, Fox, all these other channels were talking about the minority vote, Asians were not polled because we are seen as statistically insignificant, despite being 23 million strong in the US. Furthermore, the model minority myth is simply problematic because it perpetuates this falsehood that people of color can be financially successful if they just work harder. And we know that the US, the history of the US, is riddled with a ton of bigoted laws and policies, such as redlining and segregation, that have continuously made it more difficult for immigrants and communities of color to become citizens, to start businesses, and to buy homes in good neighborhoods. Therefore, making it more difficult for communities of color to obtain generational wealth, where they can pass it down from parent to child. Furthermore, the model minority myth just creates tensions between the Asian and the Black community. In 1992, with the LA riots, tension amongst both communities was at a boiling point. While the police fled to protect affluent neighborhoods in LA, Koreatown was left destroyed. And communities of color were left to fend for themselves and go at war with each other. Lastly, the model minority myth is problematic because it just simply fails to account the differences of Latinos, Black individuals, Natives, and Asians. It essentially conflates all of our identities into one. And at the end of the day, we really need to examine who is benefiting from the model minority myth, who is actually pushing this agenda. Because at the end of the day, I guarantee you it's not Asians and it's not people of color. Thank you.
Cami and Jack, thank you both very much. Good information. So now it's time to hear from our presenters, and the first question is for John Cho. John, the history of violence against Asians in the US is escalating. Can you tell us about Vincent Chin?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is John Cho. As I've been introduced already, I teach Asian American Studies, and I talk about Vincent Chin in my introduction class every semester. Who was Vincent Chin? He was a young Chinese man. This happened in the 1980s. He was adopted as a child from China, but he grew up in Detroit. So around this time, he was getting ready to get married. His father had passed away, and he was going to get married, and he and his wife were going to move in with his mom. Okay, so Vincent wanted to go out to a bachelor's party with some friends, white and Chinese. He told his mom after work, "Mom, I'm going out." And Vincent's mom questioned him, "Vincent, why are you going out? Why are you going to these places?" Vincent replied, "Mom, I'm getting married." He said, "It's the last time." She cautioned him, "Don't say last time. That's not lucky." Well, anyway, Vincent and his friends, they went to the Topless Bar. At the Topless Bar, there were two unemployed white auto workers, Ron Evans and Michael Nitz. Okay. Ron Evans said this, looking at Vincent Chin, "Because of you motherfuckers, we're out of work." I think it's very hard to say that without anger or derision. Whoever you're saying it to, you're angry at them or you're putting them down. Well, Vincent Chin did not know these men. These men did not know him. He did not work in the auto industry. He worked as a draftsman. On the weekends, he worked part-time in a Chinese restaurant. Vincent did not want to be called names. He stood up for himself. There was a fist fight. The men are told to leave the bar. The two men went to their car. They popped open the trunk. They put a baseball bat out to continue to fight. Vincent was willing to fight, but not if they had a baseball bat. So took off running. The two men hired a local guy to drive around. We want to find those guys, the Chinese guy. They found Vincent at a McDonald's. The younger man restrained Vincent Chin as the older man wielded a bat, striking Vincent in the head. There were a couple of Detroit police officers nearby. They ran up. They pulled out their guns. "Stop!" Vince stopped. The police called 911. An ambulance came. The paramedic saw Vincent. He's a goner, meaning he's not coming back. The skull was cracked. They took him to the hospital. Vincent, according to doctors, was brain dead. The only thing keeping him alive is the machine. If we turn off the machine, he will expire. So after a few days, they turned off the machine. What kind of crime is that? Is it a hate crime? This happened in the 1980s. Okay. I think it's first-degree murder. First-degree murder means you have a malice aforethought. You know what's going to happen. It's going to produce a bad result. And there's planning. There's premeditation. These two men went looking for Vincent. They had the bat with them. They found them. Well, the two men had a plea bargain. They plea bargained to manslaughter. Okay, we killed him. Can you imagine what the sentence was? $3,000 fine and probation. Don't have to serve any jail time. Well, as you can imagine, the Asian community was outraged. Made big news across the country into Asia. But there's something called double jeopardy in American law, meaning you cannot be tried twice for the same crime. Okay? Because of the Asian community, the federal government got involved and they tried the case on something else. They tried it on violation of Vincent Chin's civil rights. In other words, I mentioned hate crime, that the motivation was racial animus. How does this fit in? Well, I said the story happened in the 1980s. In America, who were selling a lot of cars? Japanese car companies. Okay, Vincent was Chinese. Do you think it made a difference to the killers what kind of Asian he was? Whether he's Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Hmong? No, I don't think it made any difference at all. Okay, the two men were convicted in the second trial, but they appealed, their attorneys appealed. And on the third trial, the men were freed. So they didn't have to serve any jail time. When did I hear about this? Around that time. I read about it in a Chinese American newspaper out of San Francisco. Okay. How did it hit me? It hit me like this. It's like the headlines right across your head. Say, Asian life is cheap. It's not worth much. $3,000? If a person tied up their dog and beat it to death with a baseball bat, I think that person's going to jail. Guess what the judge said? The judge said, if it had been a brutal murder, of course these guys would be in jail. I have a question for the judge. I'm sure he's passed away now because his case is 40 years ago. Hey, Mr. Judge, if somebody restrained your son and somebody else struck him in the head a couple of times with a baseball bat, would it be a brutal murder? You know, 100%. Everybody's gonna say, yes, it's a brutal murder. Why is it a brutal murder? Because it happens to you. It happens to somebody in your family. It's a brutal murder. If it's somebody else, it's somebody else. What if it happens to you? If I think back on this case, are there similarities to today? Of course there are. 40 years later. Scapegoating. You're blaming. If they're blaming Asians for the China virus today, they blame Asians or Japanese for taking their job away during Vincent Chin's time. Isn't that based on what Ron even said? Because of you MFs were out of work? Did race play a part in it? I think definitely so. Can you imagine Ron Evans saying that to another white person? Okay. Protest. There's protests today. There were protests back then. Jack already talked about the model minority. And think about during the time of Vincent Chen, our parents tell us to do this. Walk the straight and narrow. Work hard. Never complain. Things will be okay. And you know what my thought was? Our life isn't worth much. We get killed. Who cares? Does anybody care? Okay. The worst thing that could happen to you if you are a parent is to have your child die before you. Vincent's mom went to court. She saw. He was on the Phil Donahue show. Her English wasn't that good, but she pleaded for justice for her son. After the third trial, no justice, she decided to leave the country. If she stayed in America, every day, she would have to think about her son. My comment to students after talking about Vincent Chin's story is that we're all the same. The human core, we're the same. No matter if you're white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, all of our lives have value. You cannot look at anybody else having less value than your own. Why don't we treat each other with civility? Why don't we not commit acts of violence? That's enough for now.
Thank you, John. That was powerful. Thank you very much. Up next, I'm going.
Miley, you're currently on mute right now.
Juliana, as hate crimes and incidents continue to increase, why do you think Asians are being targeted?
Hi, hello everyone. Well, the simple answer is, as John and Jack has mentioned earlier, Asians are the scapegoat of COVID and all the problems it has caused or amplified. We're blamed for the virus, we're criticized for being successful, we're hated for simply existing. As we saw earlier, our nation's leaders and the media normalizes the use of hateful speech. Xenophobia and racism fueled with the majority of people in this country facing mass unemployment and evictions. This environment has created a dangerous bubble of desperate and angry people who are tired of suffering. Most working class people struggled to make ends meet before the pandemic. And now people are responding through violent attacks on Asians and any easy target. The rise of attacks on street vendors in Fresno has been extremely alarming as well. 2 days ago, a Fresno street vendor was shot and killed in broad daylight. I bring this up because we all have the same enemy. It's not people we need to fight. It's the system and institutions we need to address and change. Violence is woven in many powerful parts of this country, from domestic and abroad policies, gun laws, our excessive military, our overfunded police, ICE. We must recognize and condemn the violence our country upholds. And it's that very violence which fosters our society to harm, attack, and kill each other. As we learned in our earlier slides, none of this is new. The history of discrimination towards Asian Americans dates back to the late 19th century. Today, we still have to fight for our lives and validate our existence to live in this country. But I'm hopeful that if we all continue to collectively take action and create policies to protect people and our livelihoods, then we can create a safer, more caring country. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. Now, Jack, I have a question for you. In light of everything that has happened, even with the hate crimes in Atlanta, why do you think it's taken the media so long to pay attention to the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents?
You know what? I find it just simply unacceptable that it's taken 3,800 hate crimes and a mass shooting where 6 out of the 8 victims were Asian for the media to finally pay attention to us. I feel like honestly, every day I wake up to new multiple crimes committed against the Asian community. And in fact, we can be assured that this number is highly underreported. Asians simply just typically do not report hate crimes and incidents. And we know that this could be attributed to, for example, language barriers. So like just a month ago, my mom barely learned the barf emoji. And so I had to explain to her like what the barf emoji was and when to use it appropriately. She doesn't even text to begin with. So I don't even know why we had that conversation, but you know, my mom is just barely learning this stuff. I doubt she's gonna brush up on her Asian racial slurs. And if she's told that in public, she's probably not gonna even know how to report it, right? Imagine if you were in a foreign country and you were told a foreign slur. No, sorry, not a foreign slur, a racial slur in a foreign country, right? You wouldn't be able to report it, right? Furthermore, there's a shame and generational differences. For example, when this started first happening, sometime around like May, March, May, I asked my dad. I was like, "Hey, Dad, have you or Mom like throughout your years of living in the United States, have you guys ever been discriminated against, or has anyone ever told you guys anything like made a racial slur?" And you know what he told me? He said, "No, we've never experienced that before." And I took it for face value until I called my sister up on the phone just to kind of verify that story. And she like said, no, there's been times where people have told them a racial slur, you know, and we just didn't report it. Or there's been a time where my mom was victimized in a parking lot and we just didn't report it. And that's the generational difference because we have my parents' generation who was just so grateful to be here in the United States, right? So you keep your head down, you don't speak up, you don't stand out. And then you have my generation and my niece and nephew's generation where we are born here and we belong here and we are entitled to speak up. So that plays a big role, but also just the lack of national coverage certainly plays a role in the lack of attention paid to these crimes. Asians are highly underrepresented in the media and in politics. And at the end of the day, nobody is advocating for us. No one's pushing our stories to the mainstream media. And at the end of the day, we just don't have mainstream Asian media. The Black community has BET that highlights Black excellence. The Latino community has Univision and Telemundo, but we don't have that. But thank God for mainstream media. Like without mainstream media, we're still reporting on our issues through social media. So thank God for social media. We have social media accounts such as Next Shark and Asians with Attitude. And so if the mainstream media will not report on our issues, these accounts will. And you know what? I used to question what is the significance in reposting, right? It sounds like it's kind of useless, right? Like I repost something, you know, but at the end of the day, what the Black Lives Matter movement has taught us all is that there is power in social media. Because people have used their platforms to hold police accountable when the system fails to protect communities of color. So if anything that can be assured is that there is power in numbers. And we want to educate people on Asian issues. We want you to talk within your household about any anti-Asian sentiments and bias that might exist. Because at the end of the day, we're all flawed human beings who all do have biases. But lastly, the model minority myth is just also to blame. Asians are seen as passive. Asian women are fetishized. Asian men are emasculated. And personally, as an Asian male myself, I am fearful walking around in Target when I'm buying things I shouldn't be. You know, I feel like I almost have to like apologize for just existing as an Asian person now in public. When people look at me, I feel insecure. You know, and for me, because I worry really, I wonder how my parents or my elders feel. I wonder how my sisters feel because the reality is we know that the majority of the victims of these crimes and incidents have been primarily our elders and women. And, you know, at the end of the day, this issue is not a left or a right issue. It's a humanity issue and it impacts us all. People oftentimes say that they don't have any regrets in life, but honestly, I have a scroll long of regrets, you know, in life. But relevant to this, my regret is just in general in life when I just didn't speak up, when I didn't stand up for myself, when I was told racial slurs, or when I was bullied and I just didn't speak up. And that's just honestly how I grew up, though. It was what my parents instilled upon me. But now I know better because in this country, being quiet does you no good. And at the end of the day, our experiences should not be invalidated by the media, and we should not be minimized. We should not minimize our voices to fit any box that society wants to put Asians in. My parents' generation has taught us to not stand up for ourselves and to speak out. But I came across a quote from Hassan Minhaj, who is this comedian and activist, who said a quote that really resonated with me. His quote goes, "If you come to this country, you pay the American dream tax. If you're going to endure some racism, if it doesn't cost your life, you lucked out. But I was born here, so I have the audacity to demand equality." Honestly, I'm still finding my voice and fighting discomfort in my place in society as an Asian male. And to be honest, I'm really nervous here speaking in front of you all. I'm not gonna lie. When planning this discussion, I almost didn't really want to do it because it's just not natural to me. You know, I can speak to you all day long about the importance of student equity. I can tell you why baking cake from scratch is far superior than baking cake from a box of Betty Crocker. You know, I'm really passionate about baking. But you know, talking about my personal identity as an Asian male somehow is just makes me so nervous, you know, and it could be a generational thing passed on to me, you know, that I was instilled. And I'm learning to fight this. But you know what? We can all speak up and we all need to speak up. And we need to do so unapologetically. I'm talking to you, those of you watching this at home who are Asian, you all need to speak up. You cannot be complacent in your comfort zone, okay? We shouldn't only care when it happens to us or a loved one. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Thank you.
Jack, thank you for your empowering words. Wow, loved it. So Cami, many of our Asian students have reported incidents of discrimination. Even I experienced discrimination recently for being Korean American. How do we support our students, parents, co-workers, and friends who may experience a hate crime or a personal incident?
Yes. Well, you know, a victim of any crime is very difficult, right? Very stressful, very traumatic. And so being a victim of a hate crime is no different. So I would recommend, you know, if you have a loved one or someone you know that has gone through this, the first thing is to listen to them, be present with the victim. And so they know that you care, that there's someone there that cares. Offer your assistance, even though they may not ask for help. Ask them, what can I do for you? Can I walk you home? Can I, you know, what do you need? Another thing is, you know, as mentioned earlier, a lot of our Asian American victims tend to not want to report for a lot of factors. Don't push them, but encourage them. encourage them to file a police report. Also, there is a national website that we'll talk about later. They could also report there as well. And if they need help, write down the details with them, go online with them, and be there with them, because it's a scary situation. And then the last thing I would say is, help them seek mental health services. It's traumatic. A lot of folks that has gone through this has PTSD afterwards. And, our Asian American community has the lowest, is the lowest when it comes to the number that access mental health services already. So that's another thing that I am very concerned for our community, is that through this pandemic, is the mental health issue. So for students, who are out there, Fresno City, as Dr. Goldsmith mentioned earlier, we do have free psychological services. Please take advantage. Contact myself, Chai, the UCL program, and we can help you get connected. We also have some nonprofits that we'll cover a little bit on today under resources that offer mental health services in the different Asian languages here in the community. And getting back to normal for victims can be very difficult. So please continue to check up on them. I think all those are really good ways to really support our community at this time that has gone through this type of hate and these attacks.
Thank you, Cami. Thank you very much. And now, Mai, I'm going to call on you. As a mother of 4 boys, what change do you hope to see in the future for your sons and for all Asian American families?
Thank you so much, Miley. It's a great honor to be here tonight with my fellow presenters and listen to everyone's powerful stories and messages. Now, I would like to share with you what it's like to be an Asian mom during these uncertain times in our nation. I want to start out talking about the pandemic. When the world shut down for FCC and many others on March 16th of last year, there always seemed to be bad news about the virus. And it seemed to be getting worse each day, each week, and so on. Just like many other families, it was difficult for my kids during the pandemic because suddenly their normal lives, their normal routines were not so normal anymore. They had to learn a new normal quick, like literally overnight. Like so many other FCC students, my oldest son was frustrated having to move all his classes online. He had never taken an online class before the pandemic. Not in high school, not in college. I also have a son in high school and 2 more sons at the elementary school level. They struggle learning online. If some college student had difficulty learning online, imagine students at the lower grade level. My husband and I knew that we would have to talk to our children about the pandemic and explain the effect of a virus that affected everyone, regardless of race or age. Even though the event started in another part of the world, we knew it would eventually come to our community, maybe even to our own home. We warned our kids about the dangers of the pandemic and how they can stay safe. I would never, ever imagine that racism against Asian would be another thing that we'll also need to warn my sons about during the pandemic. We never had any deep or serious discussion with our kids before on such a serious topic. How can I explain to my kids? I'm thinking, what words can I use? How can I explain to them and discuss with them about racism against Asian when I am searching for answers myself? I was a bit torn about discussing racism with my 2 youngest ones because they're so little. I wasn't sure if they would be able to comprehend what I'm telling them. Can I find the right words to tell my 8 and 9-year-olds what racism means? The cartoons that they watch certainly don't discuss racism and address racism in any kind of form. At school, they were always surrounded by friends of all ethnicities. I wasn't sure how to tell them about life in the real world where being Asian means they could be hurt verbally or physically. I decided to have a discussion about racism with my kids when I saw a story about a father and his 2 young sons being attacked in Midland, Texas that Cami mentioned earlier. A Burmese father had taken his 2 young sons to Sam's Club when he was suddenly attacked, and slashed across the face. His 6-year-old also suffered a deep gash in his face, as you guys saw in the pictures. It made me think, what kind of coward would vent his hatred on such innocent lives? The story broke my heart because that family could have been my own family. It could have been my husband. It could have been my sons. You know, my 11-year-old son has always refused to sleep with his closet door open in his room. I was telling him, don't worry, there are no monsters in your closet. Now I have to tell my sons that there are real monsters walking around in the streets attacking Asians. My children ask why Asians are specifically targeted. I told them it's because we have a president whose choice of words blame the Asian community stirred up hate in people. I know I cannot control what's going on in the community and in the world, but I've taken steps to control what's going on in my own home to make sure that I raise kids, my sons, to respect everyone regardless of who they are. I evaluate myself as a parent and the kinds of beliefs I pass on to my children. I know they're always listening to what I'm saying and watching what I do. I hope that my words and action exemplify how I want my sons to be and how I want my sons to treat other people. Since my younger sons have returned to school in person last fall, I have talked to my children's school to make sure they have a zero tolerance policy for racism or any type of discrimination. They assured me that they do follow the district's zero tolerance on racism or discrimination. I'm glad I asked the school about their policy because a few weeks ago, my youngest son had an incident at school where one of his classmates unintentionally called him an inappropriate Asian name. The incident with my son, when compared to the violent attacks against Asians across our nation, is not so significant, but it no less had an impact on our family. Hearing about the incident made me very sad, but I was filled with so much hope after going through the incident. It gave me the hope that the school followed through on their promise to have a zero tolerance for racism or discrimination in any form. The school did not simply just have a policy, but they followed up with the words with actions. It gave me hope that the other family responded with shock and sadness that their child said such a thing. I hope that the other family will use the incident as a conversation starter to discuss racism. And last but not least, it gave me hope that my son spoke up when he knew something was not right. I read an article where they mentioned that research has strongly shown that children's exposure to microaggression and discrimination practices have long-lived, deeply painful psychological consequences. I was glad my son spoke up because who knows the long-term effect on his mental health if he had kept the incident to himself. Did the other child call my son a racist name to be mean on purpose? No. Unlike adults who has hate in them to insult Asians with verbal harassment, kids are, I think, a little bit more innocent. It was probably said in a moment of rough playing during recess. Was my son hurt? Yes. It made him cry. All the moms out there will agree with me that we hurt more when our kids hurt. I felt so good that my son spoke up and the situation was handled appropriately. I hope that I have taught my sons that they have to speak up when they see or hear something racist. See something, say something. It's so true. I feel optimistic that my sons will be a part of a generation that stops the stigma against self-reporting incidents in the Asian community. Asians must change their perspective and understand that reporting on crime does not make us weak. So going back to the question, what change do I hope for the future of my children and for all Asian American children? I hope that the physical assault against Asian Americans will stop in the immediate future. And like so many out there, I don't really know or have any solutions as well. We must speak up and protect Asians from assault, though, especially against the vulnerable elderly. I want racism against Asians to stop. I hope that by the time my youngest son becomes an adult, racism against any race will not be a daily or weekly headline like we are experiencing now. Even if we win the fight against the virus or our fight against racism against Asian will continue much longer. But I hope that changes will be coming soon. This is something that I do not want my kids to deal with or even think about when they're adults. We cannot pretend that the violence against Asian never happened. I always reinforce to my children that they have to learn from their mistakes to become better people. We must learn from the horrible and sometimes deadly attacks against Asians to make our community safe for everyone. Like many Southeast Asians, my family and I came to America as refugees. We never imagined that hate and violence would be something that we had to deal with. As a mom, I hope that my children never deal with the ugly side of hate when they're adults. I want them to achieve their goals and aspiration and always, always be proud that they are Asians. They are Asian Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mai. Thank you for sharing your family story of hope. That was very encouraging. So John, I have another question for you. Last week, Representatives Chip Roy and Grace Meng commented on the anti-Asian American hearings. John, can you share an update on what you heard?
Sure. Representative Chip Roy from Texas at the hearing, she was talking about the bad Chinese Communist Party. Grace Meng, who is earlier in that video, representative from New York, said, "You're putting a bullseye on the backs of children and grandparents." So it's kind of like fits in to an idea like blaming people again. One thing Representative Roy talked about, and I disagree with strongly, was he says lynchings. I guess he feels that's a good part of the legacy in Texas. Well, actually, I have a question. I'm not really going to propose it to Representative Roy. I wanted to ask him about the 1871 riot in LA, where 19 Chinese were killed, okay? 15 of them were lynched or hanged after they were dead. What's the point? They're dead already. So why do you have to hang them? Does he feel proud about that? The early Chinese workers that came to America, they're called coolies. Do you know what coolie stands for in Chinese? Kulia. That means bitter strength. If you're going to America, you better be strong. You better be willing to take hardship. On Sunday, I got a phone call from my son, who's living and working in Shanghai, China. And so we talked about regular stuff being work, exercise, COVID-19. Towards the end of the call, he cautioned me, when you're out, look around your surroundings. What is he talking about? He's talking about in Asia, the image people have that in America, it's dangerous to be an Asian person. People ask Representative Roy to resign, give an apology. For me, his apology doesn't mean much. I doubt it's a sincere apology. You know who else you will never hear an apology from? You guessed it, Donald Trump. Is he ever going to apologize? Well, a couple weeks ago, when President Biden was saying, "Oh, we have so many people receiving the vaccine." So Donald Trump issued a statement. Okay, he says, "If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have a vaccine unless 5 years from now, maybe never." And he refers to COVID-19, and then in parentheses, often referred to as the China virus. Well, Donald Trump, who else calls it the China virus except for you? The video that we saw, that was March 2020, in which you said the virus comes from China. And you're saying this month, okay? Does this impact the violence against Asian people in America? Well, aren't the acts of violence individual acts? The people that decide on their own to commit acts of violence against Asian people. What I would suggest for our society, well, from 2,500 years ago, something that Confucius taught people. He taught them the negative golden rule. Do not do unto others what you don't want them to do to you. Well, let's use a simple example. You should not push an Asian elderly grandfather to the ground because you don't want somebody push your grandfather to the ground. Okay. I've been here at Fresno City College about 30 years as a full-time instructor, as an adjunct teacher. I would say during those 30 years, this event has to rank in the top 5 in terms of meaning or significance for me. And I want to thank 3 individuals for conceiving and organizing this event. Chai Her, Kami Tepavang, and Jack Yang. Thank you.
John, makes me want to cry. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow. Okay, so if anyone is wondering how you can support the Asian community, Cami has put together some Asian support resources that she will share now. Thank you, Cami.
Thank you, Miley. So, if you're out there and you're wondering, how can I get involved, right? What can we do? What can I do? So these are just some of the, items that we came up with that you could start doing now, right? So the first one, join a rally. If there's any local rallies, or I know some friends that went all up to San Francisco and LA because they're not passionate in wanting to be part of the movement, or donate to the cause. Support local Asian businesses. I know right now all businesses, are hurting due to the pandemic. But on top of that, for our Asian businesses, they're being vandalized, windows are being broken. Folks are not going because they fear that, employees that work at these Asian businesses have the coronavirus. There was a story of a meat market owned by a Asian family up in the Bay Area. Someone left a dead cat, on the doorstep of their business, because they're implying that the reason why, this virus is over because we eat bats, we eat cats, we eat dogs, it's horrific. Also, you could raise awareness through your own platform, right? If you're in a position of a place of employment where you can really be able to bring awareness to, your employees, your colleagues, please do so. And as Jack mentioned, social media is so powerful these days. Just by simply sharing news, that can help. Also following Asian media groups, right? Next Shark, Asians with Attitudes, those are pretty big, the bigger ones that I myself follow. And lastly, simply have conversations with friends, families, and colleagues, just to provide, information and awareness about what's going on. And on top of that, even, texting, if, a friend that you may have as Asian American or a neighbor, because I myself, these past few weeks, I received emails, I got texts as well, and it means so much, it really does. So those are things that I think will be very helpful if you want to start getting engaged. And the next slide, these are resources. The first one is the reporting a crime and incident. StopAAPIHate.org is a huge one. That's where we got all our data from. And they also provide data reports, I think every quarter or what have you. So that's a great way of staying, getting the most current information about what's happening. And they also have links in there that provides a whole lot of other organizations that are part of this, trying to help with this situation. And we also have stopasianhate.info. Advancing Justice is also one that has 5 chapters. They have one in Atlanta, LA, I believe Washington, DC, and the other 2, I'm not sure where those are at, but they're big on fighting injustices for the Asian American community. And then also the other one, the free bystander intervention training, that's free. And you know how I think oftentimes what I've been hearing stories of those who've been victims of attacks, they felt like no one stepped in, right? And no one was there. They kind of just observed the situation. They didn't intervene. And I get it. It could be a scary situation for many of us. But, you know, we need to educate ourselves on how to do it safely and how to intervene. So that training, I would highly recommend. It's free. And then local resources, you know, for those, you know, that need access and need support right now. The 2 big ones are the Fresno Center, and then we have FIRM. These 2 organizations, they provide mental health services. Well, Fresno Center has a bigger one, but they provide mental health services in Lao, in Hmong, you know, in Cambodian, and a whole wide range of other languages as well. And FIRM provides advocacy, community building. They have a really good elder program over at FIRM. And then lastly, HIP California. I'm so proud of this organization. It's a fairly new organization. They have they started in Sacramento. They also opened up an office here in Fresno. And it's really focusing on the youth. So students that are here with us, if you want to get engaged with advocacy, this is a great nonprofit. So please connect with them. And the next slide, Mai is going to go ahead and cover some apps that you could download. That's also could be very helpful.
Thank you, Cami. So in order to continue supporting the AAPI community, there are ways that you can continue to do that. Donate to an Asian charity. You can do that through such app as GoFundMe or PayPal. And PayPal, you go to support a charity link on your app, and there's a search box where you can just type in Asians, and all kinds of Asian organization will come up, and you can select which one you want to support. If you want to learn more about Asian cultures, there are so many different apps out there and TV networks and shows that can give you more information. Or if you want to take a course and learn more about the Asian culture. For example, in the Coursera app, there are 2 universities that have 2 anti-racism or social multicultural courses that you can take through the app. And lastly, the Gather app, I wish I knew about this when I wanted to talk to my kids about racism, because this one is a great conversation starter for you and your family to talk to friends, family, neighbors, people that you know about racial inequality in a bit easier. So they give you prompts to talk to other people. Okay.
Thank you, Mai, for that information. I would like all of our presenters now to turn on your cameras. And I want to thank everyone for sharing your stories. So moving. I've learned so much in putting this event together. I want to thank our audience. And I am going to, we have about 9 minutes left in the program. So I'm going to go through and take a look at some of the questions that have come through. Quite a few of our deans are here. Cheryl Lynn Krill Hornsby. I know Teresa Patterson wished you all well. Our Chancellor, Dr. Paul Parnell, wrote in to share how powerful this presentation has been, and he just thanked everyone. Thank you, Chancellor Parnell. He stands with all of us, and we appreciate that. Karen Crockett thanked everyone on the panel. Michael Takeda said, Asian lives have always been cheap. By cheapening Asian lives, it makes it easier for those in power to exclude us, kick us out, intern us, normalize war atrocities, kill us. sorry. Scapegoat us, ignore us. Just a lot of support for all of our speakers. Yeah, Zhang said, I agree with you, Jack. I find myself learning to speak for myself too. As an Asian female, I can only imagine where our students are in their own identity. When their sense of belonging is taken away with these acts of violence and racial slurs, on top of that is a sense of helplessness when they may feel that their voice may not be heard, no action taken afterwards, or fear of retaliation. What resources are we preparing to support the Asian American students with these cultural barriers? We did mention psychological services at Fresno City College. Let's see. Are there any other questions that we have?
It looks like there is a question.
Can you take that, Jack, since you see it?
I'll go ahead and read it out loud. So the question is, what advice or message would you give to the younger generation, the younger and the next generation of Asian Americans? That's a great question. If anybody wants to answer that from the panel.
Okay, I'll respond. So it's addressing the younger and future generation. I would say be proud of your identity. Be proud of your identity or your Asian background. Realize that you're growing up in America. This is part of your identity. I think when everybody is comfortable, feels strong about their identity, I think it's easier to speak up for yourself. Let me tell you this. Since there was mention of the Japanese American internment, when they sent out the exclusion order to all Japanese, they said aliens and non-aliens. I've never seen the word non-alien before. And the reason they use non-alien, it should have been citizen, because they realize in their constitution, people are guaranteed constitutional rights. So this is looking at how you see yourself. Be proud of your background, whatever your background is. So forth, you are equal with everybody else. If we're talking about the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, we're equal under law. And this is a society that should be that way. That's my response.
Oh, sorry, John. I just wanted to answer that really quickly and echo what John said. Definitely be proud of your identity, be proud of your roots, and connect back with your roots. Personally, for myself, and I know that this may be a struggle to have conversations with your parents or your family, your aunts and uncles, your cousins, people that are older than you. And they might not always be open to have conversations about, their refugee stories or how they came to America in their life. But honestly, personally, for myself, when I've had the opportunity to talk to my parents about, their sponsors and how they got here and how my parents had an arranged marriage, just those things really did just connect me to my skin, my identity, and validated who I am. And then I felt like there was a sense of just me accepting myself. And that has allowed me to connect with my roots and the community. And I've been lucky enough to connect Laotian American community of Fresno. And I'm lucky that there's that organization here in Fresno that I'm able to do that and to, amplify young people's voices and just the general Lao community in general. So yeah, I would just say, make sure if you can talk to your parents, and it may be hard for them to discuss things, but they may be super open. And I think we're not used, or at least in my culture, we're not used to talking in general with just talking about beliefs or anything. But honestly, there has been really great times where I've talked to my parents, and the stories that they tell me, I feel like I can carry that on to my family, my children, and my siblings and my cousins, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, I was gonna add, Just by simply not speaking up, we're all doing ourselves a disservice. So I do want the current and the younger generation to know that. But also there's this quote that I found that I feel is very impactful. The quote goes, "The nail that sticks out gets the hammer, and then the squeaky will gets the grease." So to me, it's like in Asia, the nail that sticks out gets the hammer. So in Asia, we're told to not speak up, right? We don't want to stand out. We're a collectivist society, so we want to blend in with each other. But in the US, it's the opposite. Um, you know, you are empowered to speak up. Extroverted individuals and talkative individuals, the loudest one is the one who gets the most attention. And I think Asians were kind of caught in this dichotomy, in the middle of this dichotomy, where on one side, we're told by our elders to to stand in line and to to obey. But then on the other side, we're born in the US system and the education system, and we're empowered to speak up. So, exercise your voice. And at the end of the day, by not speaking up, you're doing yourself and the community a disservice. So get comfortable with that. It might be uncomfortable, but we're all still practicing it. I know that I am as well.
Well, I think Stand with Asians is an opportunity to start that conversation, for everyone to have the conversation and to be aware. I know there have been some questions in the Q&A about this presentation. It is being recorded and it will be on the Fresno City College YouTube. So that will be shared when this is done and it's uploaded. I don't know if we have any other questions. Just a lot of supportive comments in our Q&A. So at this time, we're about out of time. I wanted to just give a big thank you to Susie Nitzel for making this happen for us. We scrambled for a moment, but Susie came to our rescue and really filled in all our gaps. So huge kudos to you. Dr. Goldsmith, thank you so much. And interpreters, Javier and Cheryl, I think it was. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So in closing, I would like to give the Asian American Faculty and Staff President, Chai Her, the time to close out our event this evening.
Thank you, Miley. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in to our table talk. If there's anything that you take away from tonight's event, is that you stand up or speak when you see something is wrong, regardless of your race or your background, especially my Asian community. Please know that your voice matters and that it is important and that we can no longer stay silent. We need to speak up. I also want my Asian community to know that we are stronger than we think. We need to get out of our comfort zone and support one another. Oftentimes we stay silent and we don't want to get into people's business and we want to stay in our own little corner. But now is the time for us to come together. But thank you everyone so much for coming. If you guys have any other questions or comments or concerns, I will be staying behind. And we do have an email address that you guys can email us if you guys have any comments or concerns about. Cami, do you have that email by chance to drop in the chat?
Yes, it's on the last slide of the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, got it. It's on the PowerPoint, sorry. But thank you everyone so much. So again, I will be staying behind if there are any questions or comments.
And please fill out our survey. It's in the chat box. We will love your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It means a lot that you are here tonight with us.
Thank you.